Thank you, Miriam, and good afternoon. As Miriam says, I'm going to kind of talk about two pieces of work that Canon Enterprise Services are undertaking that I think are really good examples of the journey and the direction and the capabilities that Canon's building as we move to this shift to services. So the first piece of work I'm going to talk to you about is a study that was conducted by Canon in conjunction with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, the CIM, in the UK. The study was called Unlocking the Value of Creative. And what the study was about helping understand how marketeers can navigate this new creative world, this world of emerging media, this world of converging media, and this world of creative challenge. The study itself followed four key phases. The first phase was a qualitative phase with a number of depth interviews with senior marketeers from across European brand organizations. That was conducted in April of last year. What we saw there was the beginning of consistently emerging themes. And through that, we were able to develop a series of hypotheses around unlocking the value of creative that was then input into the quant phase, which is the second phase there, which is conducted in June through July. And the quant stage was an online survey that was completed by some 150 senior marketeers, again, across Europe. And what we looked to do there was to validate a series of hypotheses. And I'll go through some of those hypotheses in a bit more detail later. There was then, as you can imagine, and not quite to the same level of sort of analytics exposure as Aviva, but there was a big chunk of analysis of all of this data that came good. We then finally, in October, we launched the findings in London, and then subsequently have launched the findings in a number of different key European markets. The other point to mention around this was each of these four key stages was interjected by an advisory panel workshop. So we had, I think it was a dozen marketeers from organizations like RSA, like Shell, like BP, like Barclays Bank. And those guys were effectively a trusted panel who were able to kind of help guide the next stages. It's a highly robust piece of work, and a piece of work that I'll share some of the findings with you. So just to give you an idea of some of the organizations that we had conversations with and who were involved, often it's said that you should be judged by the company of the company that you keep, and I think on the basis of these sort of brands, some of which are represented in this room today, I think we're keeping very good company in terms of this study, which I think from a brand point of view, I think is very exciting. So the quant aspect focused on effectively 7 key dimensions that we look to work with. So exploring things like planning, what tools, what methodologies, what approaches were taken to planning marketing communications development, what governance was put in place, what tools were utilized, what processes. Creative as an area is one which is often viewed as not being able to be process managed, and we were really interested in understanding what processes were people following, how consistently, and how were they enabling those? So what sort of workflow was happening? Also, there was a big area that had come through the qualitative study around the role of collaboration, the role of working together, which again we wanted to explore. The analysis of the quantitative study identified 5 key benefit areas. So if we kind of work clockwise through from the top, in terms of potential areas of, if one was to unlock the value of creative, there would be these 5 areas of benefit delivered. So the first, in terms of consistent brand identity. So again, those of us in the room who are or have been brand managers know how important and how difficult it is to keep your brand consistently articulated in the right way. Benefit area of a more joined up approach, so more integrated marketing, more marketing integration, improve return on investment, so the effectiveness behind the spend. Talking about agility, flexibility, speed to market is something that we'll talk about when I refer to the next case study, which one of the key issues that the client will talk about was around pace to market in terms of delivering creative collateral. And the final key benefit area is better value for money, so effectively efficiency. Okay? So the work that we kind of conducted was an initial value discovery. It took 7 weeks, and we effectively did 7 kind of key stages. So these are the sort of 7 elements along the bottom of the chart. So the first thing that we did was to identify the measurable benefits. So what were the things that the business needed to change, and how would we be able to, what metrics could we put around those changes? The second piece was current state understanding. So this was effectively creating a fact-based picture of how things actually operated. So it was kind of trying to dispel some of the rumor. It was trying to kind of take away some of the sort of the emotion and get to a fact-based that meant that we understood exactly how many assets were being created, how many assets were being stored, in how many systems, across how many geographies, using what technologies, what processes were being followed, what were not. We then looked to develop a kind of a view of potential operating models. So given what we knew about where we were, where could we be? What were the different ways that the operating model could look like? We conducted a gap analysis, which allowed us to really kind of understand where the dynamics were in terms of the changes we need to make. We then developed strategic options, and developed a recommendation with a very detailed business case, and then finally a kind of an action plan. So that was a 7-week piece of work. What it then led to was the next phase of the program. There was a further 10 weeks of work, which was delivered ultimately to kind of gather stakeholder requirements, but also define the future state kind of marketing creative process. So effectively what we did was followed 3 key areas. One, content refers to the program. So as Miriam at the beginning talked about one canon, one, content was the terminology used to be consistent with the organizational architecture. But effectively, there were 3 key objectives. So the first was to increase the speed of delivery of marketing assets. The second was to reduce the cost. And the final objective was to improve governance, which is effectively around brand consistency, but also ensuring that there was a mitigation of risk of misuse of usage rights. So what we were seeing was increasingly that because there was a lack of real control, that rights owners, so photographers typically, were often challenging Canon's use of their intellectual property. And those of you who've had any kind of dealing with that sort of scenario know that it can be a very expensive place to be if you get it wrong. We then looked to develop the target operating model, which in addition to the sort of standard target operating model concepts in terms of people, process, technology, we also introduced assets, so the marketing collateral, and also a look to understand where those assets were located and stored and how they're actually sourced, how they're actually created in the first place. This phase of work identified 8 key potential initiatives. We, as a group, decided that actually of those 8 initiatives, there were 3 that we needed to focus on now, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a minute, and the other 5 should be kind of put back to later in the phase. So the sort of arrow at the top, surrounded by the red box, are the 3 key initiatives that we then moved forward as part of the program. So those 3 areas, the first of which was to re-engineer the marketing and the marcoms workflow. So this is the creative development process. The issue was that because there was inconsistency in the way that creative was developed, because there was a lack of clarity of responsibilities, what it meant was there were the delays that I talked about at the beginning, but also considerable duplication of effort. Oftentimes, we were seeing situations where a piece of creative would get almost to final sign-off, only to have someone senior in the business who hadn't seen it before veto it and therefore force them back to the beginning of the creative cycle. So what we looked to do was to develop a re-engineered process which gave greater clarity of roles and responsibilities, but also we looked to workflow automation, so looking to ways to bring technology to bear. The outputs of that were things like a summary of quick wins and a high-level process map of where we wanted to go. Second area, asset lifecycle management. The issue was that typically all product launches had a similar set of marketing assets created at launch. Those assets were typically not reused. So whether it was the launch of a calculator or the latest digital SLR, they were creating the same set of assets. So what we looked to develop for Canon Europe was a template, a framework, an approach that allowed the right type of assets to be created at the right stage and to prompt their greater reuse. The final aspect was a content management system. So the issue being there were multiple storage systems, multiple formats, very little control over the way that marketing collateral was held and manipulated and managed. So the future view was would be a far more structured digital asset management approach with clear taxonomy and kind of metadata approaches. So again, a series of outputs from that. The value that was delivered from this piece of work was kind of effectively fivefold. So there was a single high-level process that was defined that incorporated best practices that existed within Canon Europe. So we didn't just reinvent the wheel. We took bits of great practice and put those together into a single process. We created an asset framework that will drive the decision-making of future asset creation. We gathered a significant piece of requirements around that will inform the future vendor selection for digital asset management and marketing resource management. We'd also, and this is one of these things that is always sounds a bit dull, but it's actually really, really important, but actually establishing the kind of naming and kind of asset naming, metadata tagging, and taxonomy for the classification of assets was absolutely critical. And we also identified a series of quick wins. So the next steps that we're literally kind of going through now are to deliver the quick wins to the business. Second is we are selecting digital asset management and marketing resource management vendors. The third aspect is to develop the strategy around metadata tagging, so what attributes are put against different assets to allow the digital asset management library to be searchable, highly searchable. And then finally is to actually implement the change to the new enhanced to be process and actually deploy this asset framework. So that kind of concludes the formal piece of the presentation.